You can let me know if you can hear me. That would be great. If not, I'll just keep talking and ask again in a little while to check that my microphone is working properly. What I'm going to do is talk about C-PTSD, complex PTSD, and childhood trauma and self-worth. Now, clearly, C-PTSD doesn't just come from childhood trauma. You know, adults can acquire this as well, and it's not a disorder. It is something that happens over a long period of time of abuse. Different types of abuse can cause, you know, us to get to a place where we have complex PTSD. And the difference between PTSD and complex PTSD is quite simple, in that PTSD is generally, and this is not downplaying PTSD, I'm just giving you a simple example. PTSD is generally a one-off event, and C-PTSD, complex PTSD, is that where events have gone on and on and on. So what happens is that our self-worth, particularly if it's from childhood, can be absolutely bashed to the point that we've got no confidence in ourselves and we don't feel good about who we are. And we have an inner critic that is continuously bashing us, telling us that we're no good, that there's something wrong with us, that we're never going to amount to much, and various voices in our heads that in our head that's not our voice that was given to us. And this can happen through, you know, teachers as well. You know, if we're at school when we were kids and, you know, we were being creative and we were told that we would never amount to much. There are so many various ways that we can acquire this, you know, horrible thing called C-PTSD. And trauma, basically how it's spelt out, you know, if you Google it or you whatever, look at what trauma is. Psychological trauma is damage to the mind that occurs as a result of distressing events. Trauma is often the result of an overwhelming amount of stress that exceeds one's ability to cope or to integrate the emotions involved with that experience. So what we need to do as adults, we need to integrate the events and the emotions that have not been integrated in order to evolve it. And this is not a one-hit wonder. There are no magic cures, but through knowledge and understanding, we do get to a point where we do begin to evolve the pain, but it's through knowledge. And it's not, you know, clearly it's not going to be one thing. It's going to be therapy as well, but it's going to be many different things. But you know, me putting this out there is also going to help, and there are so many resources, but we have to be real in understanding what's going on and get to a point of evolving our stuff. I just wrote some notes. If you give me 1 second. What I've got here, okay, so these are my notes. So the whole point is that through C-PTSD, we're going to have to get to a point where we re-engage with our own self-worth through knowledge. And now I've explained what trauma is, but we understand what trauma is for us, but we're all individuals. And the book that generally I go to, my go-to book is Pete Walker. You're maybe not going to see it in this small little screen that I'm showing you, but Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. And that's Pete Walker. Now the book is below the links in this video. And what you're going to be able to do is get a free Audible. If you're in the USA, you go to Amazon.com and you get a free Audible of this book. Or the other thing you do is go to Kindle, Amazon UK, and you will get it free on Kindle. And I highly recommend that you do that, because otherwise it's going to stall you in healing this stuff. And if you read the book, you're going to get to the process of healing a lot quicker. What we need to do at some point, we're going to have to, as we get the book, we're going to understand what the inner critic is. And Pete Walker says, and this is the truth because I've had to do this myself, when we deal with our inner critic, we're dealing with, that's the first thing we're going to have to do, is get rid of the inner critic. So that voice that annihilates us and knocks us, we need to get rid of it. And that's going to be a daily process. When I started doing it, when I got this book 2 years ago and I started doing my inner critic work, it was really difficult. I had no idea to the level that I was annihilating myself with this voice that was not mine. So I began to tell it to, I swore at mine, which I don't want to shock anyone, but I told mine to F off. I swore at it. So every time it reared its head, I'd knock it out the way with that. We're all going to have our way of doing it, but I would say we need to be harsh with it. And it would be that if you, as an example, if you had an abusive friend, you would eventually get them out of your life. And that's what we need to do with our inner critic. We need to, and also if we've got anybody in our lives that's knocking us, we need to eliminate them as well at some point. And that includes family, if it be the case, or long-term standing, if it's work where we're being, verbally abused in any way, it needs to go. So we're going to need to reparent ourselves. How I'm going to do this is read something to you, and then I'm going to talk about reparenting self, which is really important. Thank you, Motor Knight, for telling me that you can hear me. That's really fantastic to see. So now I'm going to read a little bit, 2 pages, A4 pages from Pete Walker's website. And then I'm going to show you how to reparent yourself with a slide that I've got that I'm going to show you, and how to positive image to understand what positive imaging is. And then we'll take it from there. And then I'll come off the slideshow and you'll be able to see me. So, and this isn't going to be long if you're watching. So here goes. So I'm reading from Pete Walker from his website. So he's talking about on endangerment. So endangerment is where we keep thinking that terrible things are going to happen to us, that we think that we've got these endangering thoughts in our heads that something bad's going to happen. And generally, if people have been through childhood trauma, then something bad would have been happening every day. So what happens is, as adults, we've got low levels of trust, and we basically are looking about all the time to see, are we safe? Are we safe? And we do this in various different ways and to varying degrees at different times in our lives. That it can amount to OCD. It can cause us to, not to want to go out in the world. It can affect people in very, varying degrees. So we need to deal with any ideas of endangerment, looking at what's real and not what's not real. So here he says, this is Pete Walker's website. He says the importance and magnitude of the critic's endangerment dynamic cannot be overstated. So he's saying here where our inner critic will put us into so much fear that we don't go out into the world and we don't live our lives, or we don't get into relationships. There's just so many things. Like, if I was going around as an example saying, I'm there's something wrong with me. I'm not attractive enough. There's something wrong with the way I look. There's something wrong with something about ourselves, then we're not going to put ourselves out there. So we need to stop the endangerment dynamic. And he says, I have in fact worked with numerous well-therapized individuals who were relatively free of perfectionism, but still seriously afflicted with the drasticizing process of the inner critic. And moreover, I have seen many individuals challenge and eliminate most of the blatant perfectionist self-attacking cognitions of the critic without effectively addressing its habit of flooding the psyche with thoughts and images and feelings of fear. So we need to get rid of our fear, because there's real fear and there's fear, that is just really not real. And we, like thinking there's a monster under your bed. We know that's not real, but we can feel that emotionally. If we've been through abuse, we can think there's somebody hiding in our cupboards, or, we can just be in so much fear. So we need to deal with our fear and re-engage with our self-worth. He says here, I learned to disidentify from perfectionism long before I learned to stop perseverating my critics' harrowing snapshots of danger into feature-long films about my imminent demise, into total abandonment, public humiliation, lethal illness, penniless, homelessness, etc. One of my clients eventually identified the critic's endangerment process as horror movie producer. So we can all do that. Like I had a sore throat. I'll give you an example. I'm human too, so don't think I've got it all solved. I'm just sharing so that we all get to understand the reality of what we do. I had a sore throat this week and I thought, oh my God, it's cancer. I mean, that is endangerment. That's putting ourselves into a movie projector, horrible situation of the, oh my God, my life's going to be over. And hence my sore throat is better today. So, even people who've not been through abuse do this. So we have to understand that we need to get rid of our own movie producer that puts us into absolute terror and fear. So he also said that sometimes we can think of that as the critic as a terrorist, like a terrorist on our back, trying to scare the living daylights out of us, that something bad's going to happen. He says that we can use anger to shrink the inner critic. So we can get angry with our inner critic. And that's what I did. And when it popped up, I told it to F off. And I'm, again, sorry if I'm shocking anyone out there, but that's what I did. And it worked. And now I feel, you know, I can now, you know, I used to look in the mirror and have so much self-hatred. Now I look in the mirror, and even on a bad hair day, I'm happy with myself. I'm going, no, you know, it's more I'm treating myself like I would an inner child, with love. So he says, using anger to shrink the inner critic. He says, traumatizing parents customarily use intimidation and disgust to thwart the instinctive fight responses of their children. Recovering the anger of the fight response is essential in healing complex PTSD. So if we're following spirituality or religious beliefs or dogma, there's nothing wrong with religion or spiritual beliefs, but if we believe that we can't get angry, then this is going to be a problem, because if we can't, then that means we can't get angry with our inner critic, and we can't get angry at the abuse from whoever we had abuse from, like our parents, or we can't get angry with what's going on in the world. There is healthy anger, and healthy anger towards your inner critic is going to be a big winner for you. So we have to stop that idea that if I'm angry, I'm a bad person, because that's absolute baloney. It's not true. It's, if we're going around angry and then we're acting out on people and projecting it onto other people, that's a whole different thing. But hopefully I'm making sense here. Right, so he says, recovering the anger of the fight response is essential in healing complex PTSD. I routinely encourage clients to use their anger to stop the critic in its tracks and to help them move through the various self-attack dynamics that the critic uses to emotionally enforce perfectionism. That's the other thing. We get rid of perfectionism. You know, whatever we call it, God's source, everything is perfect. Just think about we're on Earth at the moment, flying through space, and look at the perfection in the imperfection. We're on a ball flying through space, and all of these other planets are like doing the same thing. And how long we've been here, there's imperfection and perfectionism within imperfection. So we can see ourselves that we're perfectly imperfect and perfect, or the other way around, imperfectly perfect. But we don't need to be absolutely perfect in order to live this life and to, you know, engage in relationship with people. And even for me to come on to do this YouTube, you know, if I make a mess up somehow, that's fine too. It's like, we're human. He says here, invoking the fight response, so fight, flight, freeze, fawn, which are in my other videos. Invoking the fight response is an irreplaceable tool for thought stopping the critic's outdated fear and shame-based cognitions. So we can't have an inner critic that's shaming us to, you know, telling us, oh, it's bad to be angry. It's okay to be angry with your inner critic. Go for it. Tell it to bugger off. That's what I did, and worse. Accordingly, I encourage my clients to use phrases like, I'm not afraid of you anymore. Mum and dad, critic. I am in an adult body now and I won't let you hurt me. Additionally, he says, I share Erik Erikson's emotional math. Shame is blame turned against the self. So when you feel shame, it's blame turned against yourself. So we need to get rid of any shame as well. There is nothing to be ashamed of, you know, for being ourselves. And clearly we've got to be sensible. Like if people are going to be, you know, do really horrible things, then there is healthy shame, for instance. But we don't want to shame ourselves for really things that we shouldn't be. I don't like the word should or shouldn't, but I'm using it in this with regard to this. Shame is blame turned against self, adding that it is also the parent's disgust turned into self-hate. So really think about that. When you're disgusted with yourself, if you were taught to be disgusted with yourself just for your healthy needs, wants, and desires, then you're going to feel this shame, toxic shame, which is not normal to feel. He says, typically, I embellish this with, you can externalize the anger of the critic's self-blaming messages out and away from you onto the installers of the critic, or sideways onto the critic yourself. You can give shame back by allowing yourself to feel disgusted at the image of your parents bullying you and overwhelming you with the shame when you were so defenseless. So think about this. If I saw somebody, an adult, bullying or, you know, bullying a child, then I would be really angry if I saw that. And that's how we need to feel about what happened to us. Like, you know, we need healthy anger that if we've been through abuse to heal. An inner critic that has dominated since childhood, however, does not give up its hegemony of the psyche easily. He says it refuses to accept the updated information that adulthood now offers the possibility of increasing safety and healthy attachment. It is as if the critic has worn a flashback-inducing groove in the brain of the size of the Grand Canyon, and any of the thinking patterns listed below, now hair-triggering and amygdala hijacking into abandonment, fear, and depression. The work of reminding clients that progress in critic shrinking is often infinitesimally, I think it says, slow and indiscernible at first, and can seem really hard. He's saying it's really hard at first, like when we first start getting rid of the inner critic, it's really hard work because you're going to go, oh my God, this inner critic's taken over my head. But eventually it does go away, and it might pop up in little moments, but generally I really, you know, my inner critic has shrunk like immensely. He says that the client's habitation to only noticing what is wrong and what is dangerous requires lifelong management. In the early work, I encourage the client to challenge the critic's monocular negative focus over and over with the ferocity all the ferocity that he or she can muster. Eventually, I ask her if she can find a part of herself that is mad about how grossly unfair her parents' bullying and indifference was, if there were any part of her that is outraged that she was indoctrinated and inculcated into self-abandonment and self-bullying when she was too young to protest or even know what was happening. Is she willing to now gradually build up herself to say no and shut up whenever she catches the critic, the proxy of her parent, attacking her? Then it says, with much encouragement and practice, the client gradually learns to reject her conditioning to self-abuse and self-abandonment. This is why we've got to get rid of the inner critic, because it basically is self-abuse and self-abandonment. And, you know, our parents, if they're not around us anymore and they're not abusing us, then we're going to have to reparent ourselves. Her sense, or his or her sense of healthy self-protection, begins to emerge over time and grows into fierce willingness to stop unfair criticism, internal or external. Psychodynamically, this part of the process of working through repetition compulsion, it aids the client to repudiate the parent's awful legacy of teaching her that love means numbly accepting abuse and neglect. So we were taught to accept abuse and neglect, and we've got to say, hey, no. And then also when we stop accepting abuse and neglect, it means that we're protecting other children, because we're standing up in society like I am now on YouTube saying, hey, this matters. This stuff's got to stop. Abuse, you know, over and out. And in politics and in all of it. It's like we're having a meltdown at the moment, which is brilliant in society. You know, people, you know, all of this nasty narcissism and, you know, not inhumanity, if that makes sense, the inhumanity, you know, it's over and out, but I'm seeing it. So we just got to keep going, us guys that are on the right path. Here he says, embracing the critic, in my experience, until the flight response is substantially restored, the average complex PTSD client benefits little more than the more refined and rational techniques of embracing, dialoguing with, and integrating the value parts of the sufficiently shrunken critic, an important part of later recovery work, well described in an excellent book called Embracing the Inner Critic. I don't know that book, but you can Google it. Embracing the Inner Critic by Stone and Soul Without Shame by Brown. Once again, however, these left-brained objective approaches are often of very limited use until they are backed up. So the number one, C-PTSD, inner critic work. He says here, by a subjective right brain stance of aggressive self-protection, perhaps this is because the inner critic appears to align with the extreme right brain dominance of flashbacks. So when we have flashbacks, they're right brain. They're sort of, you know, that we're not choosing them. They're sort of coming out of nowhere. The right brain is the creative side. It just comes. The left brain is where we're doing, I think that's right now. I don't want to get myself wrong here. It's very late here in London. I'll stay where I am on this and I'll come back to that. He says, so the critic appears to align with the extreme right brain dominance of flashbacks as shown in MRI scans. Perhaps inner critic processes are so emotionally charged and dominant that unmedicated efforts to resist them rationally and dispassionately fail effectively. Okay, right, what's my next bit? So the reparenting slide, this is my next bit. So let's see. Right, this is one thing. So what we're doing is, before we go on to the reparenting side, we're frozen in time with regard to our trauma. So we've got to unfreeze ourselves. And the inner critic that's the part that's frozen, the inner critic, and we need to eliminate it. And I like this picture that I found on Google, because it's a beautiful young woman and she's bound, you know, by the past, but she's asleep. And the whole beauty of with being asleep is that we can get to wake up. So in our awakening of knowing that the inner critic has got to go, we can see that we'll be able to, you know, wake up out of this frozenness that we've been put into by our parents or others in our childhood. Next slide. So reparenting affirmations. So I'm going to put this below the video after, and then you can copy and paste it and save it for yourself, or it's over, I'll put it on my Facebook page as well. So this is what we would call reparenting affirmations that you can begin to say to yourself when you're at your worst of your worst. You could print this off, put it on an A4 sheet of paper and carry it in your bag or in your wallet. Okay, so if I was going to speak to you now, or I was going to speak to my inner child, and I'm going to take my little Penelope, put her on my, you know, lap, hold her close, beautiful child that she was and still is. And I would say, I'm so glad you were born. You are such a good person. And I love you, I love who you are. And I'm doing my best to always be on your side. You can come to me whenever you're feeling hurt or bad. You do not have to be perfect to get my love and protection. And all of your feelings are okay with me. I am always glad to see you. It is okay for you to be angry, and I won't let you hurt yourself or others when you are. You can make mistakes. They are your teachers. You can know what you need and ask for help. You can have your own preferences and tastes, and you are a delight to my eyes. You can choose your own values. You can pick up your own friends, and you don't have to like everyone. You can sometimes feel confused and ambivalent and not know all the answers. I am very proud of you. So if I had a child, that is how I would be speaking to a child of mine. I've not had children. But if I did have a child, that's how I would be communicating with the child. And if we were not communicated with like that, then we need to communicate with our inner child that way. It's really, really important. Then what we can do is that we can begin to understand what positive imaging is, re-imaging. So this is what we do. Next slide. Okay, you see this beautiful picture here. This is the earth. And it's got all of this beauty on it. You can see the pink and the greens and the beauty, like it looks like a pearl. So this is our inner earth. Let's just imagine that this can be our inner world. Whatever's going on outside in the world with all of the crazy people and whatever the nuttiness that goes on, we can have this inner world that's beautiful. And then we can choose friends and have people in our lives that, you know, are like that are kind to us, that don't say stupid things and, you know, trigger us. If people trigger us, we can say goodbye to them and we can let them go. Love that word. Okay, so here goes. So positive imaging is a powerful adjunct to thought substitution. We can learn to short circuit the perfectionist and fear-mongering processes of the inner critic by invoking images of past successes and accomplishments. So I could look back this week and it's been a hard week. There were a few days that were very hard, but I can look back and I can see, you know, I accomplished many things this week. I learned a lot of things this week. You know, I had many light bulb moments this week, and I had some tears this week, and I had some fears this week, but overall I've had a lot of accomplishments. So we can begin to see, as we can have successes and accomplishments, as well as pictures of safe and loving places and friends. So if you think of your best friend right now and see what that does to you inwardly, think of somebody that you love and care for and see how that brings a new feeling to you. You know, think about like the world looking like this, you know, our blue planet flying through space, and, you know, that it's pink and it's got all of this beauty on it. And if you think of the world and how much beauty there is in the world as well, wherever we're at. So as well as pictures of safe and loving places and friends, we can also use guided meditations. I'm not one for, I don't really like meditating. I like to contemplate, but some people might like to meditate, and to demonstrate and reinforce the use of positive self-imagery substitution. So we can imagine our future, like, you know, next year I want to visit the USA, and I'm thinking about going across on Amtrak and what my journey is going to be like. And I'm thinking of all of these beautiful things. I'm not staying stuck in this horrendous past I came from. Sometimes I fall into the abyss, and I have been too deep in the abyss. I had a breakdown in 2016, which wiped out, you know, a business I'd had for 30 years. And it, you know, it really, I lost 20 pounds in weight, my hair fell out, you know, so we can really hit the lowest low. But, you know, now I'm blossoming again and I'm coming out into the world. Now, the next slide I'm going to show, and then I'm going to stop sharing screen and see if anybody wants to chat with me. But this slide, Carl Gustav Jung, if you've ever heard of Freud, more people have heard of Freud. Freud was into psychoanalysis, and then we had Carl Gustav Jung was 20 years younger, but Carl Gustav Jung is the man for me. He says, as far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. So wherever we've been, whatever we've, I'm going to stop share now. Wherever we've been and whatever we've experienced, we can begin to kindle a light within our own world. We can begin to, you know, sort of evolve, and we can begin to shine again. So let me see if I can get rid of, got all these screens open, stop share and show. I've got so many tabs open, it's unbelievable. So let me see, has anybody got anything they'd like to say to me or any questions? That would be nice if anybody has. Any questions on C-PTSD or any ideas? Or I can't, I know that Mo tonight was watching, but you might have gone. So anyway, I'll be back over the weekend. I'm doing my astrology videos, which I'm really enjoying, because we can deal with trauma through understanding our astrology chart. That's the other thing Carl Gustav Jung did. He looked at it, amongst many, many other things, he used astrology to help people heal and understand the symbology of in their chart. So it's very beautiful. Evolutionary astrology, I do. So that's it. I've got no hellos there, but I appreciate for the people that watched, and I'll be back over the weekend. I hope you have a lovely Friday. It's late here in the UK, after midnight. So there you go. Okay, catch you later. Have a lovely rest of the day wherever you are. Thanks.